Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our conversation on racial and gender equity in the justice system. I'm Brianna Tucker, Deputy Politics Editor for Next Gen at The Washington Post, and it is my pleasure to introduce our special guest for this keynote, the Honorable Letitia James, Attorney General of the State of New York. As the first Black woman and woman of color to hold this position, Attorney General James is a trailblazer who has focused her career on social justice, equity, and fairness. So you've mentioned in interviews that when you were a teenager, you spent many days in a courtroom watching your brother go through the legal system over a false bike theft accusation, and how none of the lawyers looked like you, but nearly all of the defendants did. Talk to me about what it means to be the first Black woman in this role.
So first, I thank you for this opportunity and for this interview. Being the first means absolutely nothing to me, because at the end of the day, the question is, what do you do with all of the power and the privilege that has been given to you? Being the first is nothing more than a historical footnote. Being the first comes with certain responsibilities to open the doors for others and to stand up against injustice. Being the first means establishing a platform so that others can speak truth to power. Being the first means ensuring that our Constitution applies to everyone, and that everyone is guaranteed certain rights and privileges. And all throughout my career as a former public defender, as a legislative aide, as a former city council member, as a former public advocate of the city of New York, the first woman of color elected citywide, and now the first woman of color in New York elected statewide. All that I have done, throughout my career, is stood up and attempted to provide access and rights and equality to all individuals in the state of New York whenever I've confronted it.
What does race and gender equity mean to you? What is your definition of that?
So it means a lot of things, as the first Black woman and as a woman who has seen discrimination, who has tasted racism. I have a duty to address racism, institutional racism, and racism in all of its forms. And equity is really all about leveling the playing field and making sure that individuals who have been deprived have access to all opportunities, not only in the state, but all throughout this country, regardless of their race or their ethnicity or their orientation. It's my responsibility, again, to provide access to all and to truly work on making sure that this is a country which sees me as an African-American woman, but sees beyond my race.
And I want to move forward and actually talk about abortion while we open up this topic. How is abortion playing out in New York State almost 1 year later after that moment, after Roe versus Wade was overturned?
So I am blessed to live in a state where we have made attempts to enshrine reproductive rights in our Constitution. I also happen to live in a state where reproductive rights are protected. And what we are doing here in the Office of the Attorney General is we've established a task force of 40 of the largest law firms in this nation. We have a hotline. The state government, under the leadership of the legislature and the governor of the state of New York, have provided resources to community-based organizations to increase their capacity to provide reproductive access to all individuals, not only those here in New York State, but all across the country. Individuals who reached out on our hotline to ask questions with regards to their criminal liability, their civil liability, and their vulnerability in their respective state, if in fact they were to assist an individual in getting an abortion. My days at representing and protecting reproductive rights go back to when young girls would come into my city council office, young girls who did not know where to turn, young girls who did not come from perfect families, and some who did come from perfect families, who basically sought to get information on where to go to get an abortion. They would frequent my office quite a bit in the borough of Brooklyn, and I will always provide them with assistance. It's important that individuals know that the overturning of Roe versus Wade was a political decision, and this most recent decision in the fifth district was also a political decision, and it was a decision based on the values of one individual who overturned 20 years of precedent against mifepristone, a drug where millions of individuals have taken, and it's been kept, and it's been safe. It's been the subject of a lot of scientific evidence and expertise. And for one judge, one male judge, to overturn that decision, really, and to substitute his values and his knowledge over that of scientists and experts and doctors is an affront to me and to all individuals who care about reproductive rights. And I am hoping that the United States Supreme Court at some point in time will revisit the Dobbs decision and recognize that they were wrong, that they should have relied upon precedent, and then they should have relied upon the fact that women and others have relied upon reproductive rights in this country, and that their decision was inconsistent with stare decisis.
The overrepresentation of people of color in the prison system. And in New York and throughout America, people of color are far more likely to enter the nation's justice system than the general population. How is your office working to combat the ways the justice system contributes to systemic racism and bias? And how are you measuring that progress?
So as the state attorney general, I'm responsible for all, I represent all the state agencies in the state of New York, and we have jurisdiction over the Department of Correctional Services. And so we have conversations with the governor of the state of New York, as well as with the commissioner, as well as with law enforcement in general, to ensure that their practices are racially neutral, and that the criminal justice system and enforces the law based on the facts and on the evidence, and not based on race. It's also instructive that as the Attorney General of the state of New York, which reviews now and has the opportunity to investigate all police encounters with civilian, which may result in their death, we also have an opportunity to review police practices, and if the police officer or the law enforcement officer is responsible for the death of a civilian, to bring charges against that law enforcement officer based on the law, that the ability to prosecute law enforcement officers was removed from district attorneys in the state of New York because of the inherent conflict that exists, because district attorneys have to work with police departments and work with police officers. As the Attorney General of the state of New York, we do not have that conflict. And that's why we have the responsibility, we've been given the responsibility to analyze and to investigate all civilian deaths at the hands of police officers and to bring charges when necessary. And also, we are in a position where we introduce legislation to change our system as it relates to law enforcement in the state of New York, and to ensure that it is racially blind, and that we are doing it, again, based on facts and based on evidence. And we have a judicial system which is diverse. And so we continue to work through the political system, as well as with a number of elected officials and the state legislature and the governor, to ensure that we have a system which reflects the diversity of the state of New York. And also, let me just say that language access is also a major issue in the state of New York. And one of the things, working with allies on the ground, my colleagues in the Legal Aid Society and a number of allies who are focused on racial justice, they report to me about certain judges in certain counties throughout the state of New York. We have a civil rights bureau. We launch investigations into any allegation of racial bias or racial discrimination or disproportionate number of individuals of color who are being treated unfairly in the criminal justice system anywhere in the state of New York.
And, moving this forward in diversity, because we're not just talking about racial diversity here, we're also talking about gender as well. You recently hosted a drag story hour in New York. And we've seen several Republican-led states actually target drag performances. How do you think about your role as Attorney General in setting the agenda around protecting trans rights?
So I sponsored a drag story hour primarily because two elected officials, two council members who sponsored drag story hours were assaulted. Their offices were vandalized. Their staff was harassed, and their family members. And so as the chief law enforcement officer in the state of New York, it was my responsibility to stand up and to support the trans community and to let everyone know in the state of New York and all throughout the country that hate will not be tolerated in this state. And that this trans hour, to me and to my colleagues, was all about literacy and love. And that's it. And so these allegations that we are hearing and seeing that we're grooming young children is nothing, there could be nothing further from the truth. The reality is that the hour-long storytelling that we had with drag queens was, again, about literacy and about love and about toleration of others. And as the Attorney General of the state of New York, I have stood with the trans community and will continue to stand with the trans community because I abhor discrimination, because I understand discrimination, because I have been a victim of discrimination, and because this state will not tolerate discrimination. And that's why we have brought action and defended trans rights in the state of New York and have been a leader all across this nation, joining with like-minded attorney generals and standing up against individuals who will not provide gender-affirming health care to the trans community, standing with individuals who unfortunately have been denied participation in sports, and standing up with the trans community so that they could live their true lives.
And you've been vocal about that, not just in New York, like you said, but outside of New York. You called out Florida Governor last month, Ron DeSantis, for actually violating public university students to privacy over his request on information for those who were receiving gender-affirming care.
Right, because listen, right now what we are witnessing all throughout our nation is politics which are polarizing our nation. And what we are seeing are individuals who are engaging in cultural wars as opposed to dealing with the economic issues that so many Americans are concerned about and bringing us together as opposed to focusing on dividing us. We find ourselves more divided in this nation than ever before. And it's only because individuals take advantage of certain situations and engage in petty politics and cultural wars at a time when what we really need to be focusing on are, again, economic issues and rebuilding our economy, focusing on manufacturing jobs, and focusing on, again, opioids and fentanyl and other types of drugs that unfortunately are affecting too many communities all throughout this country and in the state of New York. And what we should be doing is responding to them as opposed to, again, fighting one another over artificial constructs such as race and denying women the right to have complete control over their bodies.
And I want to pivot and make sure that we give enough time to also talk about community engagement and trust in the justice system. For many marginalized communities, because of their experiences, the words trust and justice system are polar antonyms, particularly with police accountability and investigations. Tools like video and body cameras, we've seen them proliferate throughout the country, but no significant changes in police violence or outcome or accountability in officers. What is your response to people who say the state of New York has not done enough?
So I would disagree. As you know, I was the council member who advanced body-worn cameras for law enforcement in the city of New York. And as a result of body-worn cameras, we've been able to capture a number of incidents which have drawn attention to law enforcement, resulting in changes in the city of New York with respect to how law enforcement officers police its civilians. And as I mentioned earlier, now as the Attorney General of the state of New York, I have the authority to investigate law enforcement officers when they encounter, the street encounter results in the death of a civilian. I also want to say, as a former Assistant Attorney General, I was involved in the stop and frisk investigation in the state of New York, which led to the demise of that practice in the city of New York. So it's important that individuals know we've made a lot of progress with respect to accountability and transparency. Is it perfect? Do we have a lot more work to do? The answer is absolutely yes, but we certainly have made progress in this space, and we look forward to making additional progress as we go forward.
The Washington Post and other outlets have reported on your investigation of sexual harassment cases in New York state politics. Do you think the country has turned a corner in the past few years in how we handle sexual harassment?
Sure. And obviously, there have been a number of movements, not only in the state of New York, but all across this country, which have brought the issue of sexual harassment to the forefront. And as the Attorney General of the state of New York, I was involved, obviously, in working with the legislature and passing legislation to inform individuals about their rights with respect to sexual harassment and codifying it in law. And as the Attorney General, we not only investigated the former governor of the state of New York, we have engaged in sexual investigations of individuals in restaurants, individuals at their businesses, and we brought justice to countless number of women who have been victims of sexual harassment in the state of New York and in the city of New York, and we will continue to do that.
You said in an article for The Advocate last month, people have an idea of what an attorney general is, and I like to think that I'm not your traditional or typical attorney general. What kind of attorney general would you say you are, and what's your vision for justice reform in New York?
So you don't have a lot of attorney generals who are former public defenders. You don't have a lot of attorney generals who are focused on justice for all. You don't have a lot of attorney generals who have my background. Most of them have come out of corporate law firms, and a lot of them have come from Ivy League law schools and colleges. I graduated from a historically Black university. I am a public defender, and I am someone who is laser focused on justice and justice for all, and who has been focused on the rights of marginalized and vulnerable populations all throughout my career. So I'm not your typical attorney general, but I say that to say that's why change is necessary. And that's why individuals who are viewing this recording need to know that they too need to change the regime of the typical offices, be they Congress, the United States Senate, in the legislature, or in the Attorney General's office, or in the office of the president. We need to make sure that we have a wide range of individuals who apply for different offices and run for different offices and win different offices, and the diversity will go, and the diversity not only at the lower levels, but the diversity will continue all the way to the top.
And we're here, we're having a conversation about race and gender equity, and the people in the room, the people at this summit that are hopefully actively involved here as well. How do you have these conversations with individuals who are not reimagining justice, who stray from uncomfortable conversations when thinking about the words racial equity, gender equity?
So, sometimes you have to make the comfortable uncomfortable. And so it's important that you speak the truth to individuals, not only in settings like this, but wherever you go. It's important that we confront these issues. And it's because there's wounds, and the only way to address the wound is to heal. And it's important that we address these issues. Listen, I just came from Buffalo this past weekend where 10 Black people were murdered who were shopping at a supermarket, at Top Supermarket. And it's important that we recognize and we talk about African Americans, and we be proud of who we are as a people, but we talk about our resilience and our ability to overcome our certain situations. And so, you know, East Buffalo had been ignored for far too long, but now it's getting attention. And because of the structural racism which is baked into that town, which it was redlined, that community is now getting its proper due, but it came late and it came after a tragedy, and that really should not be the case. And there are East Buffaloes all throughout this country. And what we've got to do is allow individuals to speak truth to power, just as they did in Tennessee, those two young men, just as they're doing in Florida, just as they're doing all across this country. We've got to rise up, resist, and continue to affect change in a wide range of areas. And that is not against anyone. It is all about being inclusive and about equity.
Just to end on a high note, where do you go to stay inspired and committed to this work?
So, as you know, all the movements within the African American community come out of the Black church. So I am a woman of faith. I am inspired by my faith. And every Sunday, my cup is full. And I replenish that sense of urgency and that sense of justice at a house of worship, wherever I can see the word and connect with the word and recognize that now is the time to move this nation forward and to make sure that this nation honors its promises to all of its citizens.
Wow. Amen. Attorney General James, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. It's been informative, engaging, and we touched on so many important issues through the lens of racial and gender equity and justice, and in your position in this fight.
I appreciate it. And as I say, the struggle continues. Thank you. Have a good day. Bless you.